I have signed the pledge. Yeah. So I will be totally pledging my allegiance to the Republican Party and the conservative principles for which it stands, and we will go out and we will fight hard, and we will win. We will win.
You could make it almost fit into a Pledge of Allegiance, couldn't you? It's surprising to hear it that way. GOP frontrunner Donald Trump at a news conference in New York. You heard him. He signed the pledge. He will not run as an independent third-party candidate. It's not a binding pledge, by the way. There's not like a contract. But he says, nope, there's no intention to tear it up. And he says he will support the candidate who wins the Republican nomination. For more now, we're joined by Rick Davis. He managed John McCain's presidential campaign. It's great to see you today, Rick.
Thank you very much.
So Donald Trump, we saw him in that first GOP debate, the only guy on stage who would raise his hand and commit to running as a Republican, and yet now he is. Why the timing here?
You know what, I think it's kind of funny to watch the evolution of Donald Trump, the candidate. First of all, I think probably the first time he was asked, he had no idea that the Republicans would be serious about giving him the nomination. And I think he's now seen, probably with his own eyes, the polling data and the crowds, hey, I can win this thing. And so now I got to start being a conventional candidate. And I think you see probably this week has been a good example of where he's tried to basically become a more traditional candidate and pursue a nomination, wherein I think before he thought they'd be crazy
to
give me the nomination.
Jeb Bush has been hitting him very hard on his conservative bona fides. Let me play the attack ad, if you want to call it that, that Jeb Bush put out.
Sure.
Do you identify more as a Democrat or a Republican?
Well, you'd be shocked if I said that in many cases I probably identify more as a Democrat.
Why are you a Republican?
I have no idea. I lived in New York City and Manhattan all my life, okay? So, you know, my views are a little bit different than if I lived in Iowa.
So here you've got Jeb Bush doing a great job of perhaps raising questions in conservative voters' minds about whether Trump is really belonging to this party. But is signing a pledge going to be persuasive to those who doubt it?
No, I don't think the pledge in itself sort of identifies himself, you know, in an ideological fashion. And as you have seen and many readers have seen, there's been a lot of press lately about how, you know, Donald Trump isn't an ideological candidate. He's a candidate of personality, a cult of personality. And I think that what you've seen in the last few days is probably the word conservative comes out of Donald Trump's mouth every 2 seconds. And so they realize that they're vulnerable to the fact that he doesn't really have a standing in the ideological community. He's just a phenomena. And I think he's trying to make that conversion. And I think that that's a hard trip for him when you have this kind of footage that you can put on television. And believe me, I don't think this is the last we'll see of this kind of an attack.
Does anybody really believe that if Trump does not win the Republican nomination, he's going to stick to this pledge, that he's not going to go his own way and say, I'm going to run as an independent?
No, I think the whole thing is a bit of a farce in the sense that it requires him to do nothing, and yet he gets the benefit of standing up for a day with the Republican Party chairman wrapped around his axle, you know, saying, wow, this is great. We've convinced Donald Trump to be a Republican, as if that's somehow such a great deal.
Monmouth University's out with a new poll today, and one of the most interesting things I saw is that they put Donald Trump up head-to-head with individual Republicans, which, of course, doesn't really happen in the whole primary system. He comes out on top in this poll against, say, Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz. You know who he doesn't come out on top against? Ben Carson in a head-to-head matchup for the GOP nomination. Carson comes out 55% to Donald Trump's 36%. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, I think if you look, the top three candidates in almost every national poll and in most of the state polls now are, you know, the candidates who are non-traditional candidates. And they take up 40, 50% of the field. And I think that is a real indication that voters have sort of had it with traditional politicians. They're fed up with Washington, and this is their way of espousing their protest. And I think that the rest of the field have got to figure out a way, if they want to play in this nomination fight, to have a conversation with those voters. And the traditional ways of doing it aren't going to work.
So Jeb Bush was doing a traditional conversation with potential voters. He was at a town hall. Again, Jeb Bush right now in this Monmouth poll coming in third place with 8% of the vote. He has a rather awkward exchange with someone on the topic of illegal immigration. Let me play it.
Would you answer my question about what you're going to do about Mexico? They're the one, that's the root of the problem. Now,
what do you mean?
They don't do anything out the border. We're being defensive. Why don't we be offensive for once? Why don't we tell Mexico, we're not going to give you $1 billion a year in compensation or benefits or aid. We're going to close our...
They should enforce their southern border. That I agree with.
What about the northern border where we are?
The northern border is not where in the last 5 years immigration has come from. It hasn't come from Mexico.
They're coming through Mexico.
Absolutely. That's why we need to control the southern border. You're right.
Well, then Jeb Bush went on to say that it's not appeasement, and he has repeated what we've heard from him before, that most of those who come across the border into the United States are doing so out of love for their families and hope for a better life. It seems like he's gone back to having a more nuanced stand on illegal immigration and striking out on his own with something that he would probably not get a lot of Republicans to back him up about. Is that a winning strategy at this point?
You know, it's tough to say if it's a winning strategy. I think it's a forced strategy, and he's being forced into this debate because Donald Trump has based his campaign on basically immigration as a single topic. And it's what gets him the headlines that he's gotten. And you can run all day long with commentary about whether or not you like what Donald Trump is saying or not, but he's made it the #1 issue in the Republican primary fight. And that has forced all these candidates, but Jeb Bush particularly, because his outspoken beliefs in a more comprehensive reform and in the past. And so what has been up until this point in time a pretty silent Jeb Bush on immigration has forced him to get into the topic. And I think today's exchange shows that he really isn't ready for that. I mean, the idea that you're going to satisfy a voter in a town hall by changing the topic to the southern border of Mexico, and if we could just get hold of that, somehow all our problems are going to be solved on the northern border, is probably not going to satisfy a lot of Republican primary voters.
Rick, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.